Hi amiguis, my name is Pam. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's video, which is going to be a reading recap of kind of the last 2 months. Reading has been a little slow going for me over the past couple of months, I'm not gonna lie. So I've got plenty of books to talk about in this recap, but it's happened over more than a month. I have just been sucked into a little bit of a World Cup and Love Island vortex for the past couple weeks. I can't deny it, and I just haven't had a lot of free time to read, or when I have had free time, I've been occupied with other things. And yeah, I just haven't been super absorbed into my reading as I usually am, which is a little bit of a bummer, but I do have some books to talk about, and they vary. They're all kinds of genres, all kinds of vibes, and I don't know, it's been, yeah, like I said, a weird reading summer, but for the sake of being a completionist, I figured I would tell you all about the books that I've been reading and just chat in general about my plans for the rest of the summer in terms of books. But let's just get into the recap. I think I'm going to go in chronological order this time just because I don't really have like a good way to structure these. They honestly, I'll give you my ratings for each of these, but they all kind of fell within the same range of ratings. Spoiler alert, I don't have like any highs, 5-star new favorites, and I don't have any that were like complete flops either. So I'm just going to go in the order of which I read them. So let's take it back to early May when I read Hemlock and Silver by T. Kingfisher. T. Kingfisher, I have now read a lot of her work, mostly her standalones. She does have some longer series that are very popular, the Paladin's Grace series, which I haven't gotten into, but I've heard that it's really good. And I do really enjoy T. Kingfisher, so I do want to get to those at some point. But all the ones that I've read of hers are mostly standalones, and this one was a fairy tale retelling, quote unquote. And I don't know, I just think when it comes to T. Kingfisher, she's very inspired by fairy tales and by trying to like reimagine a story, a classic story. But it's a little loose in terms of like retelling. She kind of takes like some major elements and big inspiration from these stories and then just like turns it into her own unique story, which was the case with this one, which is in its essence very inspired by Snow White. So in it, we follow a healer named Anya. So she is a healer, quote unquote healer, but really she specializes and is very interested in poisons and specifically researching poisons and trying to find the antidote to poison. And she's really, really good at what she does. She's very specialized. She has a lot of knowledge and she's kind of known in this world to be really good. So she is seeked out personally by the king. And he goes to her because his daughter, Snow, has been very ill for some time, and they're not sure what's causing it. She's been seen by many doctors, and none of them have been able to pinpoint the cause of her illness. So the king suspects possible poisoning, so he comes to Anya to hopefully help him figure out what is wrong with Snow. And she reluctantly agrees to help him. She's a little bit scared of the repercussions because this is the king and he's so important and powerful, and she's not super confident that she'll be able to figure out the reason for Snow's illness, so she's a little bit scared of the consequences if she happens to fail. But still, she agrees and she follows him to his home where Snow lives. She starts to investigate, and after a lot of failed attempts to try to pinpoint the source of the illness and a lot of failed research, one day she sees Snow eating a strange looking apple, and she's like, that's weird. could this be related? And then the mystery kind of unravels from there. I won't say too much. I feel like the mystery aspect is the fun part about it. That's what I really enjoy. So I won't give too much away, but this was an interesting one. I enjoyed it for the most part. T. Kingfisher, I just really, really like her writing style, her characterization, her humor, her descriptions. I really like just her writing in general. But I will say it took me a minute to get into this one. It was just a bit slow at the beginning, trying to set up the characters, the world building. I wasn't super hooked until about a third of the way in, but then it got really good. It hooked me, and by the end of it, I was really having a good time just going along for the ride, and I liked it. It was equal parts like spooky and mysterious and comforting and cozy to me in a way that I think T. Kingfisher really does well, and why I enjoy her work so much. And there was also like a little sprinkling of romance that I wasn't anticipating, but I did really enjoy. So I think I ended up giving this like a 3.75 or 4, somewhere around that range. I think 3.75 is more accurate just because of how slow it was at the beginning, but then it kind of picked up and I ended up really enjoying it. Next was an F1 romance novel. This was Cross the Line by Simone Zoltani, and I listened to this via audiobook, and this was recommended to me by a friend who heard about it from his friend who is an F1 girly like me. So I knew that I could trust this recommendation, and I really enjoyed it. I've been really, really into F1 for a few years now, and I've been wanting to read an F1 romance, and this was my first one, and I was really, really excited about it, and it did not disappoint me. It was just a really fun time. In this book, we follow Willow Ryder, who is a recent grad, and she studied marketing, but she's having a hard time finding a job. And she has a brother named Oakley who used to be a kart racer for a long time, and he stopped racing, but he's still really good friends with somebody who continued and is now a Formula One racer, Dev Anderson, who just so happens to find himself in the middle of a little bit of a PR crisis, and he's looking for a new social media manager. So, enter Willow. Oakley invites Willow to go with him to a racing weekend in Monaco, and Willow comes and reconnects with Dave, and she has a little bit of a past with him. They have known each other their whole lives because he was best friends with Oakley, but they also may or may not have explored a little bit of a crush in the last few years. So he offers her a job because he finds out that she's looking for a job and she's in marketing. She accepts, but she's a little worried about like having to be with him a lot of the time, and just like the feelings that may arise based on their previous history. So, it goes from there, and it was cute. It was a fun time. It was exactly what I was promised. It's just like relatively low stakes, romance, and a lot of F1 references, which I found really, really fun. That kind of made the book for me. If it didn't have the F1 aspect of it, it would have just been like a very standard romance, very forgettable, but because it had all the Formula One, it just made it really fun for me. Obviously, the Formula One world in this book is fictionalized, they're like completely different teams and racers, but it was still really fun. And I feel like it was accurate. All the like sports terms and references were all very real and immersive, and I really enjoyed that. So yeah, not much to say about this one besides that I had a good time. And I think probably anyone would have a good time regardless of whether you're big into F1 or not, but I think especially if you are a fan of motorsports. this one would be extra good. I think I ended up giving it 4 stars or maybe 3.5. No, I think I gave it 3.5 just because it was like a little bit standard romance, but I still had a good time and it was fun to visualize like a more diverse world of Formula One. So here's to hoping that we can actually see that in real life in the near future. Yes, that was Cross the Line by Simone Soltani. Next, I read My Train Leaves at 3 by Natalie Guerrero. This was also an audiobook, and this was for one of my book clubs, which is one where we read books by Latino authors. And this one is, I would say, kind of a mix between adult literary fiction and like a coming of age story. I think when I first read the description for this book, it was described as a coming of age story. So I was expecting something more like young adult, but our protagonist in this is in her 30s or is either late 20s or like she just turned 30 or something. But yeah, she's more, like a few years into her adult life than I was expecting. But I guess it is like a little bit of a coming of age because she's just finds herself in like a really messy place in her life and is trying to like see where she's going to go from here. So I guess in that way it is kind of a coming of age story. But anyways, we're following Xiomara, who is a New Yorican. She is an aspiring Broadway star. And for many years, her and her sister Nena, since they were kids basically, they were working on this dream for Xiomara to become a big Broadway star. And she felt like she was about to have her big break when her sister died really suddenly and unexpectedly. And when we meet her, she's kind of recovering from the fallout of Nena's death and the way that in the year following that, her life kind of unraveled and was very destroyed by her grief. So she's trying to slowly pick up the pieces, and at the same time, she is starting to hear about this play that is going to have auditions soon by this notorious director named Manny Santos. And a lot of people in her life know that she has these aspirations and they recommend for her to audition. They're like, you would be perfect for this role. She's not sure about it, but she realizes like, okay, this may be like my last chance to really break through and make it big in the musical theater world. So we follow her as she's starting to prepare for auditioning for this role and also just like living a very messy life. She's like struggling to make ends meet, and she's also just making some really questionable decisions in like her personal and romantic life. And yeah, I mean, it's a literary fiction work. It's mostly a character study. I actually enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I was going to enjoy it. To be honest, when I read the description for it and when I started reading it, I was not super excited about it because I love reading books by and from Latino authors and about, the Latino experience, but I just feel like the struggling Latina in New York characterization has been kind of overdone a little bit, or maybe I've just like read a lot of versions of it, so I was like, okay, this might just be like something I've read before. But actually I ended up really liking it. I feel like, although yes, like it is another story about a Latina in New York, it also explores things that I hadn't seen explored before. The world of performing arts and like musical theater, I hadn't really read about that before, so it was cool to see and like dive into the darker aspects of it, the power dynamics, the toxicity of it. And then I also liked the exploration of Xiomara's grief and her relationship with her sister. And I mean, it was a little bit of a bummer, but it was still interesting to explore. So yeah, I ended up liking this one, again, around a 3.75 to 4 range. But I will say you kind of have to be okay with pretty unlikable characters. Xiomara is very imperfect. She is a little bit of a mess. She makes questionable decisions, and the people in her life and the people around her are equally messy and questionable. So you just have to be okay with unlikable characters sometimes. But I do recommend this one. It was very interesting. Okay, next is a book that I just picked up on a whim because I felt like I needed a little bit of a breather, a little bit of a break. I wasn't sure what to read next, so I picked up a poetry collection. I read Dog Songs by Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver was a very famous poet from America, and she is well known for writing about just like living a peaceful life and appreciating nature, appreciating the environment. And I had heard a lot about her, but I had never read her work before. But I thought this would be a good place to start. I heard that this one was good for dog lovers. So I picked it up and I had a really good time. I mean, it was a very quick read. It's not a very lengthy poetry collection, and her poetry is like very quick and accessible, but it's very, very touching. And yeah, I just had a really good time. This is a collection of poems all about the different dogs that Mary had throughout her life, and it's structured by dog, I think. So like each section is like all poems about this one particular dog, and I really enjoyed how you could really tell how much Mary loved each of her dogs, and each of the dogs' quirks and personalities really come through in her poetry, and it was just really sweet and heartwarming and emotional for me as a dog lover and a dog parent. And I read this in a day. Like I said, it was very quick, but I just like couldn't put it down because each poem was so sweet, and I spent the day just like reading it out loud to my dogs. I think they also quite enjoyed it, and yeah, just definitely recommend if you are a dog lover as well, or have pets. And yeah, just a really sweet one. And I am interested in reading more of Oliver's poetry because I really enjoyed it. I was really touched by it.
He puts his cheek against mine and makes small, expressive sounds. And when I'm awake or awake enough, he turns upside down, his forepaws in the air, and his eyes dark and fervent. Tell me you love me, he says. Tell me again. Could there be a sweeter arrangement? Over and over, he gets to ask, I get to tell.
Okay, next is actually another T. Kingfisher, and this is another audiobook. Wow, I really went hard with the audiobooks in the first half of this recap, and I think it's because Hemlock and Silver took me a long time, especially at the beginning. So yeah, a little bit audio heavy, but here we go. This is another T. Kingfisher, which I picked up because it was available on Libby, first of all. And I was a little bit like in a spooky mood. Summer always gets me in a horror mood for some reason. I think it's like the combination of the hot, swampy vibes here in Texas right now, and like my desire to escape them, and then also like looking forward to the fall on the other side of this, and just like, I don't know, some existential dread that comes along with it. I'm like, I just feel a little bit spooky, a little bit eerie right now. So I picked up one of T. Kingfisher's horror novels. I have previously read The Twisted Ones, which is another one of her more contemporary horror books. I feel like the two camps that the T. Kingfisher books that I've read fall into are like fantasy retellings and more contemporary horror, but still with like a little bit of a supernatural twist to them. So this one falls into the latter, the contemporary horror, but still with like some speculative elements to it. I really enjoyed the twisted ones, which also falls into that camp. And so I was excited for this one, which is a story about a woman named Kara. She recently separated from her husband, so she's going through a divorce and she needs a place to stay. And her uncle, who is a quirky man who owns and operates like a small museum full of like oddities and curiosities, he offers her to stay with him in exchange for her helping him to run this museum. So she accepts the offer because she gets along with her uncle and she has a lot of good memories from her childhood from the museum, so she's excited to help him out a little bit. But pretty soon after she moves in, her uncle suffers from a knee injury and he has to go into surgery and then like recovery from that, so he's going to be away from the museum for a few weeks. So he asks Kara, or Carrot, I think they call her in the book. He asks Carrot to help him run the museum for a few weeks. So she agrees. And then pretty soon after she agrees, I think literally on her first or second day of running the museum by herself, she is hanging out with her barista friend from next door, and they stumble upon this strange passage. They find like this hole in the wall, and they don't know how it came to be, but they start exploring it and they realize like it doesn't like physically make sense that this hole is here. So it's just very eerie and mysterious, and they go in and find like this bunker and this very strange place. I won't say too much more because like it immediately starts to veer into some spoilers, but this is like a horror, mystery, creepy thriller vibes. And that's what I was looking for. That's what I was hoping for. At the beginning, I was very into it because it starts off really mysterious, really engaging, and also just really witty in the signature T. Kingfisher way. So I was really enjoying it, but then towards the middle, I feel like it really, really started to drag. It was just like taking forever to get to anywhere with like high stakes or like any kind of pivotal moment, and I just started to lose interest. Kind of like the opposite experience that I had with Hemlock and Silver, which started off slow and really ramped up. This one started off great and really plateaued towards the middle, and yeah. I think I ended up giving it like a 3.5 or 3.25. Sorry, I get like too in the weeds with my ratings and it doesn't matter, but my point is that it was fine. It was just fine. It wasn't great to me just because it like lost so much steam towards the middle. Also, I feel like the world and the threats in this world, which gets like very speculative, they were also just very conceptual and a little bit hard for me to visualize. I was a little bit lost as to what was going on sometimes. And that may be a product of like my mind wandering a little bit, and this being an audiobook. I just feel like sometimes when things get a little too speculative, I feel like a physical book is what works better for me, so I can like really take the time to read and absorb and understand what's going on. So yeah, it might have been a couple of factors, but this one just didn't work as well for me, which was a bummer. Still love T. Kingfisher, but yeah, just based on the expectations that I have for her and her writing, this one was a little bit of a letdown for me. But I continued to be in a little bit of a horror mood, so my next physical book was Horror for Weenies: Everything You Need to Know About the Films You're Too Scared to Watch by Emily C. Hughes. And this is a nonfiction book. I forgot how this book came into my radar, but I've just been interested in continuing to like submerge myself more into the horror world, specifically like horror movies and like visual media, because I love a horror book, one of my favorite genres, but I'm just a little bit of a baby when it comes to horror movies. I've like dipped my toe into horror, but I really want to like wade a little further. I wouldn't say like dive headfirst into the genre or anything, but like there's been a lot of horror movies that have come out recently that I'm like really interested in watching. So yeah, this book was kind of perfect for that, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a recap basically of a bunch of horror films that have kind of revolutionized the genre in one way or another and really made the horror scene what it is in film. And it's structured by kind of the different horror movie eras, starting with the 60s, which is when the movement really kind of ramped up and established itself as a film genre. And it just goes movie by movie and it explains each of the movie's plots in good detail. And then it also talks about why this movie was important, its impact, the tropes that it kind of helped establish in the horror industry, in the horror genre, and just fun facts about the movie or the making of the movie and the ripple effects that it had down the line for the movies to come. So yeah, this was just a really fun time. I learned a lot about the movies that I've grown up hearing about but was too baby to try to watch myself, like Halloween, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like Rosemary's Baby, a lot of like these classic movies that have changed the game and established themselves as like iconic and have made themselves part of the lexicon and part of pop culture in general. And there were a few that I had also seen myself, but like I learned more about and what they represented and what they did for the horror genre. And yeah, I just like really respect the horror genre a lot more now. I will admit that like I used to be one of the people that kind of looked down on horror and just thought it was silly and campy and like just had cheap scares. But now, you know, I think reading horror really opened my eyes to the fact that horror can be a really good way to explore a lot of like life's real societal horrors, just in a way that is more imaginative, more creative. And yeah, I'm just really interested in watching some more horror, maybe watching some of the movies that were discussed in this book, and just facing my fears and being okay with being a little uncomfortable for the sake of art. Okay, next physical book was Superfan by Jenny Tingu Zhang, who is a local author. She lives in Austin, and this book was really infused with a lot of Austin and Texas details, and I found that really fun. But this is a coming-of-age story. It's a literary fiction book that follows a girl named Minnie who just started college at the University of Texas, and the novel takes place in 2014, which was a year that I was also at the University of Texas. So Minnie and I confirmed to be at UT at the same time, so that's cool. I was basically a character in the story. No, but we're following Minnie, and she's a freshman on campus, and she's having a really hard time with finding connection. She feels really lonely, and she's not been successful in her attempts, as futile and few as they are, to connect with people. But one day she stumbles on this video of a newly debuted K-pop band called Hourglass, and she is instantly in love. She really falls deep and hard into this fandom, and the boy band becomes kind of like her happy place in this world where she's like just really lonely. Another POV of this story is that of Eason, who is one of the members of the boy band. He goes by Halo as his boy band stage name, but his real name is Eason. And he was kind of recruited out of nowhere. He was delivering pizza when they were holding auditions for Hourglass, and they saw him and they were like, oh my gosh, you have to audition. We have to have you in this band. And he becomes a member, and then because he has no background in dance or singing, he kind of has to work his ass off to be able to be on the other members' levels. But, you know, he becomes a member of this band, and then they debut, and instantly they're like a smash hit. They become famous, and they garner this huge following of really devoted fans. So we're kind of going back and forth between their two perspectives, and Minnie, like I said, she's just trying to find some connection, and she starts becoming involved in the band's online following and the online community. So it's an exploration of like fandom and parasocialism and how far people go, and like the murky waters between being a really big fan and crossing over to, you know, being pretty toxic to the people behind the celebrity persona. And then on Eason's side, we're really exploring his really dark and traumatic past that he is trying to escape from by being in the band and by the fame and alter ego aspect of it all. And yeah, eventually these stories intersect and they kind of parallel and overlap each other as far as themes. I think Minnie and Eason are both craving connection. They're both really lonely in their own ways, and I think the novel does a good job of exploring fame and like the concept of fame and fandom and just how polarizing those two can be, but also like how similar in a lot of ways, how lonely and disorienting and toxic those ideas can become. We're also exploring like some trauma and sexual assaults, and the things that happen in this book get very, very heavy, like heavier than I was expecting. But I don't know, overall I enjoyed the themes and I thought the plot was interesting. Like I said, the Austen aspects of it I really enjoyed because it gets really into the nitty-gritty details of campus and the city, and it's always cool to hear about places that you know really intimately in books. The things that were a little bit more of a struggle for me to get into was the overall writing. I feel like there was something lacking in it for me. I feel like the themes and like topics, for like how much I liked them and how interesting they were, I just feel like they stayed a little bit surface level. Like there wasn't a lot of depth in the writing, and it was hard for me to like really emotionally connect with the things happening in the book. And then I also just feel like the author struggled a little bit to connect the two arcs and make like a cohesive thesis and like emotional climax of the book where it all comes together. I feel like there was a good attempt, but it ultimately like didn't quite stick the landing for me. But it is, I think, Jenny Tingui Zhang's either debut or her second novel. So I think there's a lot of potential. I think I would be interested in seeing what she writes next. And I think this is a really good start for an author so early in her writing career. So that was Superfan, and I gave it 3.75 stars. I just can't land on an even whole number. Okay, last but not least is one final audiobook, which was Private Rites by Julia Armfield. I have been wanting to read this book for a while now because I loved Julia Armfield's previous book, Our Wives Under the Sea. That was one of my favorite books the year that I read it, which was, I think, 2024. And I should reread that book. I just remember really, really loving it. And I have a physical copy of it because I enjoyed it so much. And yeah, I was excited to read another book by her. In this one, we are following 3 sisters, Inez, Irene, and Agnes. Sorry, no, that was wrong. Isla, Irene, and Agnes. There was 2 I's and then A. And when we meet them, they have just found out about the passing of their father. They all share a father, but Isla and Irene have the same mom, and then Agnes is their half-sister. She has a different mom, and she's younger than both of them by like 10 years. They have a very complicated relationship. A lot of this book explores their very messy family dynamics. It also explores the grief, which is also very complicated because they're dealing with the fallout of their father's passing. Their father was a famous architect. He designed and built homes for the very wealthy, and he designed and built their own home, which is kind of like this imposing character in its own right in this book. But their father was also very emotionally abusive to them, and he was often pitting them against each other, and he was just like a very brooding and antagonistic force in their lives. So their grief for him and how they're dealing with his passing is very complicated. And then on top of all of this is this dystopian environmental factor, because in this world, it seems like the effects of climate change have really advanced. And there's like widespread flooding in the city that is driving a lot of people out of their homes. It's disrupted every aspect of life, from food availability to transportation to, like I said, people's livelihoods and their homes. And it is getting worse and worse. And the 3 sisters, they are definitely part of like the upper class. And we see that in the way that all of this environmental disaster is in the background of their stories, but it's not quite an imminent threat as it is for a lot of other people in the society. They can kind of continue to live their lives and have like everyday problems, but this crisis and the flooding, it's always kind of there in the background. And there's also like this mysterious aspect to it all where the women feel like there's always people watching them, always people following them, like weird things that have happened to them throughout their lives, which can't really be explained, and they can't really figure out if there is something like more sinister going on or if it's just like their own anxiety and paranoia. So this is quite a slow novel, and there's a lot of like creepiness and mystery to the tone of it, but it's not like action-packed. It's quite slow and reflective. But Julia Armfield's writing is just so incredible. I guess to contrast it with the book that I was just talking about, Superfan, like that book, the themes were so good and the story was good, but the writing just like didn't hit like the writing in this book did. Julia Armfield is just like such a great writer. Her descriptions and how she talks about like characters and their relationships is really, really good. And I enjoyed this one a lot. Not quite as much as I really, really loved Our Wives Under the Sea, but it was still really good. And like the dystopian environmental factor of it really gave it like an extra layer of eeriness and dread, because I just feel like, it feels dystopian and very speculative, but at the same time I'm like, I can definitely see that happening. It's not like such a strange speculative world that like I could never see it happening to us. So yeah, that was a little bit existentially worrying, but yeah, really, really like this one. It was a good way to close out the month, which was full of like good but not great reads. Like I said, they all hovered around like 3 to 4, and this one was definitely a 4. A solid 4. Finally, a nice whole number. But yeah, as you can see, I was like slowly veering into like the darker, more horror themes towards the end of the month. And that has continued a little bit, but I do find myself now really, really in a reading slump. I am powering through. I'm still like reading almost every day. And I'm reading right now some books that I had been really looking forward to. And I was like, these will definitely help me get out of this reading slump because I was excited to get into them. So far, they've been just okay. So yeah, we'll see. But Love Island is ending. The World Cup is ending. I'll be free of those distractions. So maybe my reading will pick up again and I'll find something that I really, really love. Fingers crossed, but we'll see. That's all for now. I hope you enjoyed and I hope you're having a good summer. Let me know what books you've been reading. Are you also in a dreadful horror mood like I am? Or are you reading something more uplifting? Because honestly, I feel like I could use a change of pace. And if you're reading something happy that really is like making you feel joy right now, I would love a recommendation for a book like that. But anyways, thanks for being here. I will catch you in the next one. Bye, amiguis.